We are recording this podcast on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. We wish to pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend our respects to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who may be listening.
Hi everybody, I'm Priscilla.
And I'm Elise.
Welcome to Novel Feelings, where two psychologists take a deep dive into your favorite books.
As usual, don't forget to keep up to date with us by subscribing on your favourite podcast app and follow us via @novel_feelings on Instagram and Twitter. Yes, we're still on Twitter.
We are.
I thought Twitter was going to be a bin fire, but it still seems to be going. But I mean, it is still a bin fire. But
it's a slow burn.
It's just a bin fire that won't go out.
Yeah.
Anyway, you can also follow our 2023 reading challenge on the story graph. We'll post a link to that in the description if you're interested, or it's on our Instagram as well.
Yeah, and today we are here for an interview. Slightly different. I think this one, I don't think we've done an interview with someone who wasn't an author of fiction novel.
Yes, but the opportunity came up and there was so much interesting content to talk about. Just so you all know, we do have a bunch of author interviews in the works, as well as our next review episode, which is Tiger Daughter, and will be coming up in just a couple of weeks' time. We will post our release date once I know when it's coming out, but mid-March. We are looking at mid-March.
Yes, which is closer than we think.
Yeah, time is going forward at a terrifying speed this year, just saying.
Yeah.
Anyway, today we are interviewing Dr. Jac den Houting.
Yes, so just to tell you a bit about Jac. Dr. Jac den Houting is a research psychologist and autistic activist working in pursuit of social justice. Jac is committed to creating real-world change that benefits autistic people in the areas that matter most to the autistic community. Jac believes that autism research can be most meaningful and impactful when it is conducted by and with the people it is intended to serve, autistic people.
Jac trained as a psychologist in Brisbane, Australia, where they also completed their PhD through Griffith University's Autism Centre of Excellence. Currently, Jac is a postdoctoral research fellow at Macquarie University in Sydney, where they investigate structural and systemic inequities in autism research. Prior to their research career, Jac gained 10 years' experience as a psychologist in the criminal justice system.
Thank you to the All About Women Festival at the Sydney Opera House for linking us together. Jac will be part of the Actually Autistic panel alongside Chloe Hayden and Grace Tame, and it will be moderated by Amy Tunick. If you're listening at the time of release, there's still time to check it out. Sunday, March 12th, 2023 at 3 p.m.
You just forget what year it was for a second.
I know, yes. I'm still in 2022.
That is fair. Also, the panel will be live streamed. If you can't make it, just visit sydneyoperahouse.com. Now it's time to introduce our interview. And just a quick content note that this interview does cover some themes including ableism and discrimination. So as usual, please listen at your own discretion. Let's get started.
Hi, Jac. Thank you for your time today. Let's start off by talking about your career. We are also psychologists, and we would love to hear about your experience as a psychologist in the criminal justice system.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess started out my career in the correction system in Queensland. So I actually worked in one of the correctional centres or prisons up in Queensland for about 5 years and was a provisional psychologist to start with and did sort of the supervision process that we have to do as psychologists. Eventually became a full registered psychologist. From there, I then moved on and worked for the Queensland Police for probably about another 5 years, but a lot of that was part-time while I was doing my PhD. So really interesting places to work.
I'd say
Absolutely, so. Yeah. What drew you to working in that system?
So I actually did my undergraduate degree, or it was a double degree technically, in psychology and criminology. As a teenager, I had big dreams, as you do as a teenager. And I, for some reason, imagined that I was going to be able to become a criminal profiler, which I now know is not really a thing. I don't think there are any criminal profilers in Australia. Maybe there's one or two. But yeah, outside of sort of the FBI and television, that is not a viable career path. So yeah, that didn't work out quite as planned, but I was, still really interested in that sort of intersection of criminology, psychology, I guess understanding how people's minds sort of work in ways that I guess allow them or enable them to do things that, beyond the norm and that society, for often good reason, doesn't, understand or endorse So that was sort of what led me down that path, I suppose.
Yeah, I did criminology in my first year of undergrad, and I went into it thinking it was going to be like Veronica Mars, just this like really cool, like intense class and very like interactive and like fascinating content, and it was probably the most dry subject I took the entire undergrad. There was still obviously very interesting parts of it that I guess, from my experience, my expectations weren't met with my little exposure to criminology. But we would like to hear about your research career as well. Can you talk us through your area of research and perhaps some of your current research projects?
My area of research, I guess, broadly, in my mind, it's broadly. For most people, it would be very narrow. But my area of research is autism. Within that, I guess I have a few different particular areas of interest. My main research project at the moment is focused on sexuality, gender, and sex education for autistic people. Exploring what people's experiences have been in terms of the sex education that they've received or haven't received, and with the end goal of hoping to improve that, to develop some resources or a program that is better suited to autistic people's needs in terms of sex education. My PhD project was focused on anxiety in autistic people. So I've done some work around anxiety. I've done a bit of work around, the concept of neurodiversity. And my most recent project prior to the sex education project was focused on participatory research. So the idea of getting, the community involved in the research that's being done about them. So getting autistic people who don't necessarily have a research background involved in actually producing the research to make sure that research is, relevant and accessible and useful to the community that it's designed for.
Yeah, such an important area. Oh my goodness. So I work and research in the mental health field. So specifically for broadly describing the community as people who have complex mental health needs. My PhD has involved a co-design study, so I've been learning a lot about participatory research and what that means and what that looks like on practical terms as well, and realising how much research is done for people but not with people is a very eye-opening space to be in. And I imagine in your field of research, maybe not as much participatory research as we would like to see is necessarily happening or has happened historically.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that's really quite new in the autism space. It's only, I think, really been on the radar maybe the last 10 years, if I'm generous. Mm-hmm. Although there is one sort of research collective, autism research collective, that's been around for quite a while, a group in the US called Aspire. But aside from them, there's really been almost no participatory research in the autism space up until the last few years. It's good that things are starting to change, but yeah, well overdue, I think.
Yeah, boggles the mind a little bit that it's only just started to happen recently.
Mm.
We understand that you began to identify as autistic at the age of 25. How would you describe your experience as an autistic advocate?
It's a big question.
It's a very big question. I guess for me, I was identified as autistic in 2011. It wasn't until 2013 that I actually sort of started to venture into the autistic community, I guess. And that was partly just because I took some time to sort of, I guess, come to understand, what autism was and what it meant for me. And partly because I didn't even necessarily realize that there was an autistic community or an advocacy community until sort of done a bit of that digging and taken that time. Yeah, so it's been 10 years now that I've been been sort of involved in the space. And I think I probably had a lot to learn to start with, and am glad, I think, that I realized that reasonably early on, and didn't go out with all guns blazing when, in hindsight, I really had no idea what I was doing. I spent a lot of time just reading and trying to sort of listen and learn from people who had come before me. I think that's a really important thing to do when you're building on sort of an established history of advocacy.
People can't see us, but we are all nodding along very enthusiastically at that statement.
Yeah, so, I spent a lot of time doing that. I was really lucky to be involved with a program called the Future Leaders Program, which was run in 2013 alongside one of the big autism conferences. And that, for me, was sort of the launching point, I guess. I was really lucky to meet some sort of key people who have been really great mentors and supports for me. And those networks proved to be really valuable then in terms of just helping me to find opportunities and, helping to sort of build more connections and get my work out there.
That's great. Yeah, it sounds like it's definitely been a journey for you. What are some of the key messages that you are aiming to communicate through your advocacy work?
It's another big question. And there are so many. I think it depends on the audience, and it depends on where the audience is at, I guess, in terms of their understanding. With some audiences, the key message is going to be, something as simple as autistic people are still people. We still have human rights and we still deserve respect, and really basic things like that. With other audiences, it might be more complicated things, like sort of debunking some of the myths around autism, the myth that autistic people don't have empathy, or the myth that autistic people don't want friends or want social interaction. I guess that really key messages probably center around the idea of neurodiversity, though, the neurodiversity paradigm, and that sort of idea that diversity is a very natural and normal part of humanity, and that diversity in and of itself is a valuable thing. And the idea that autistic people aren't, we are a disabled group, but we are not necessarily disabled as a result of being autistic. We're disabled as a result of being a marginalised group in society and existing in a world that doesn't meet our needs, that isn't designed for us.
Is that the social model of disability? Am I getting that right?
It is. There are a few different models. So there's sort of the social and the medical model are kind of the big two. But there are a whole bunch of sort of more recent models that I guess span the space in between them. That sort of acknowledge that interaction between an individual's characteristics and the environment, which I think is important to acknowledge as well. That, you know, it's not necessarily just the environment or just the individual's characteristics or impairments, but it's sort of an interaction between those two factors that creates the disability. Yeah.
I need to look into that, the models that are in between. I feel
it's not something we're taught in psychology. I don't know why you would think it would be.
Yeah, I can say that it was only last year that I heard about the social model of disability, and it's been so useful in talking to, because I do autism assessments with adults as well, and it's quite useful to have that language to talk about how, you know, this doesn't mean that you are broken in any way. Is this, you know, the environment's not set up to care for you or hasn't been your whole life, and that can be quite a game changer for some people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of autistic people who do get the diagnosis or come to identify as autistic late in life, they do come into it with that sort of feeling of, I'm broken, there's something wrong with me, I'm a failure. That's certainly, I know I had a lot of those sort of thoughts before I found out that I was autistic. And I think having that understanding that, no, it's not you, it's your needs are different to the majority of other people, and those needs haven't been met. And that's why you've struggled, not because you're, a useless human, but because you haven't had what you've needed for most of your life. And nobody can be expected to thrive if they haven't had their basic needs sort of understood or acknowledged. And I think it's important too when we sort of talk about like the social model of disability and talk about this idea of the environment not accommodating autistic needs. I think it's really important to note that the environment doesn't just refer to the physical environment, because I think people often sort of assume, oh, I'll just dim the lights and turn the music off and it'll be fine. But the environment is much broader than that, and one of the biggest barriers that a lot of autistic people face is actually other people's attitudes. And that's a part of the environment, the emotional environment, the attitudes and behaviour of other people around you is a really big factor in, I guess, determining how accessible things are and how understood and accepted you feel and all of that kind of thing. So, environment is sounds very simple, but it's actually quite sort of complex and nuanced when you really get into it.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the people I've worked with said something along the line of, the problem is not that I'm autistic, the problem is other people's response to my autism.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. In 2019, you did a TED Talk called Why Everything You Know About Autism is Wrong, and it went viral, and it has attracted more than 1 million views on YouTube. You might get a few more as I send this video to a couple of people. Has life changed for you at all since this video was released?
Yeah, yes and no. I definitely did not expect the TED Talk to get the response that it has. It's been incredible, and I'm thrilled that that message has gotten out there and been seen and heard by so many people. In terms of life changing, I think in sort of a broad sense, I still work at the same place. I still do more or less the same job. It hasn't changed in that sort of broader sense. But definitely something I noticed when the talk started getting some traction was just the the sort of barrage of emails that started coming in, I definitely receive a lot of emails from people who have seen the talk, which is, I mean, it's lovely. A lot of the time, it's people just sort of writing to say thank you or share a bit of their story with me, which is, it's lovely, and I really appreciate it. Sometimes it's people seeking advice, and unfortunately I don't have the capacity to help all those people, and that's really hard to know that people are sort of contacting me because they need help, and I'm just not in a position to be able to respond to that. I mean, it's amazing to know that something that I've done has reached that many people. And I did actually put together a website after, sort of in response to all of the emails. I thought, if I can't help all these people myself, but at least, I'll put together a website, I'll put some links in there, I'll put some of my work up, and hopefully people might find the website instead of my email address.
Yeah.
And go there and hopefully find some help.
Good idea to set that up, I think. And can I say, I almost never look at YouTube comments, but I did for this video, and they are so positive and so grateful for the video too. And I'm used to YouTube comments being a mixed bag, to put it politely. Like, sometimes there's a few nice ones, but the ones attached to your video, so many people have found a sense of validation from that video, which I think is really lovely to see. In your talk, you spoke about how we need a paradigm shift when it comes to our understanding about autism, even though it's only been 4 years since the talk was released. But from your perspective, do you think the shift is happening, whether this might be in academia or society in general?
I think it is. I definitely don't think I can take credit for that. My talk happened 4 years ago, but the autistic advocacy movement and the neurodiversity movement has been around for much longer than that. Some of the earliest autistic advocates that we sort of, I guess, have record of as being aligned with the neurodiversity movement. They were doing work back in the early 90s. So it's been, I guess, there's been advocacy in the space. There's been people pushing for this paradigm shift for, 30 years or so? Yeah. So I do think it's happening. I think it's happening slowly. I think it has definitely picked up speed in, say, the last 10 years or so, and maybe even less, maybe the last 5 years or so. I certainly have noticed that I am starting to see, the word neurodiversity just entering the mainstream a lot more. I was watching an episode of Orange is the New Black at one point, and one of the characters sort of said, "Oh, that's where our neurodiverse inmates work."
Oh, cool.
And I thought, amazing, you're using neurodiversity. You've used it wrong. That's grammatically incorrect, but I'm going to let it slide. So it's I think it's definitely getting more of that mainstream attention, which is good. And I think the general sort of ethos, I guess, of what advocates have been pushing for is reaching the mainstream. I think a little bit of the nuance often sort of gets lost along the way, which I don't think that's unique to autism. I think that's something that tends to happen, when things become mainstream. They get condensed down into the sort of nice little sound bites and chunks and whatever we can absorb with our 30-second TikTok memories. So, it's a bit of the nuance is lacking, but I think it's definitely there's definitely progress, and I am hopeful that it will keep happening, keep moving in the right direction. Yeah.
So you mentioned about the barrage of emails that you got and putting together a website. How do you balance sharing your own lived experience publicly while maintaining your privacy as well?
Sharing my own lived experience publicly, I think this is one of the areas where the sort of reading and research that I did early on in my advocacy career served me quite well, because in some of the things that I read, I came across a term that was, I believe it was coined by one of the early sort of autistic advocates. That may or may not be accurate. I don't know, but that's I'm going with that. I'm running with that. And he came up with this term, the self-narrating zoo exhibit, which was essentially a way of describing some of the very early efforts at autistic advocacy that we see still today, but to a lesser extent, which was essentially just sort of autistic people being put on display like a zoo exhibit, getting up, sharing very intimate personal details of their lives for the benefit of the audience, professionals or parents of autistic children or whoever it may be, with really no reciprocity in that, no real benefit for the autistic person, and sort of creating a real power imbalance as well. And so that was something I was quite wary of, I think, when I started my sort of advocacy journey was I want to sort of share my experience to be able to help people, but I don't want to become a self-narrating zoo exhibit. I don't want to be, giving up my power to people who may or may not use that in the best interests of whoever, who may or may not sort of acknowledge or appreciate what I am giving them. I have, I guess, my own sort of almost an internal catalogue, I suppose, of where my boundaries are and, what I will and won't share, what I am comfortable talking about and what I won't sort of touch on publicly. And that, that changes from time to time as I grow and develop as a person. I, might be more comfortable talking about some things and less comfortable talking about other things. But I think it's an important thing to do if you're going to be doing activism or advocacy and sharing your own experience is to go into it with a clear idea of where those boundaries are. I know for me personally, if I didn't have that, I am someone who is more likely to just go with the flow and answer the question and then really regret it later.
Yeah, I've heard of the concept of a vulnerability hangover before, which I really like. So, when somebody shares something really difficult or really personal about themselves and then feels this emotional response to that in the hours or days afterwards as a result, and that's usually a sign that maybe things may have gone a little bit too far past that boundary.
Yeah. I'm also quite mindful of, I don't know if you're familiar with Stella Young. Yeah, she has a fabulous TED Talk where, and in that she talks about the idea of inspiration porn. And so that's another sort of, I guess, concept that I'm quite mindful of is, if I am sharing my experience, I don't want it to be inspiration porn. I don't want someone sitting there listening to my story and thinking about how wonderful and inspirational I am because I am a disabled person who is managing to, stay alive. If they're going to be inspired, I want them to be inspired because I've done something that's actually inspiring.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yes. So the professional element is interesting too because, of course, with your research focusing around autism, Academia is a space where people often have a very professional kind of boundaries and might not be encouraged to share their own opinions and views and everything all that much of the time. I was wondering if you could tell us about your experiences as an autistic advocate, specifically within academia, and what that has been like for you.
I think I have probably been fairly lucky in my experiences of academia, in that I haven't encountered as many of the challenges, I think, as I know that some other openly autistic academics in the space have come across. I think that's partly due to being based in Australia. I think we have a fairly progressive sort of little community of autism researchers in Australia, which is great. I think it's partly the specific people that I've had the opportunity to work with as well. There's an article from a colleague of mine, Dr. Monique Botha, and they have written, it's an amazing piece. It's one of my favourite academic articles. Monique is also an autistic academic who works in autism research, and the piece they've written is an autoethnography, essentially, where they describe their own experience of being an autistic academic in autism research. And it really resonated with that on a deep level. It explores the challenges, not just that you might encounter from sort of peers or colleagues questioning, are you objective enough? You're too emotionally involved, all of that sort of thing, which is only even vaguely relevant if you're doing quantitative research anyway. Qualitative research is all about, positionality and reflexivity and all of that sort of thing. But on top of that, the sort of almost trauma, I suppose, of constantly having to engage with this material that is written about your community, and often written in just really quite awful ways. Autism research historically has done some fairly horrific things to autistic people, but even some of the research that's published today is, maybe not as awful as it used to be, but definitely not designed with autistic people as readers in mind. And so it is really challenging to sort of constantly be exposing yourself to these kinds of ideas about your community and about yourself, and having to, I guess, engage with that in a professional way and not let it get to you too much. It's not an easy space to work in as an autistic person. And it's one of the reasons I think why I appreciate when I do hear from people who, sort of send through positive feedback about the TED Talk, because it's, sometimes getting one of those emails after I've just read a horrific journal article, it's sort of that little bit of motivation of, people do actually appreciate what I do, and, I will push through and keep going and hopefully create some benefit in people's lives, and it will be worth it in the long run or in the grand scheme of things. Yeah.
And hopefully that means fewer terrible articles will be published down the track because of this work as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think things are improving. I think there's still plenty of research published that I would not recommend reading as an autistic person, but the proportion that is, written in sort of a more sensitive way, a more accepting and positive way, that proportion is growing. It's still small, But yeah, it's growing. So things are going in the right direction.
Yeah. From academia to popular culture, our podcast focuses on media representation, specifically books. What would you like to see improve when it comes to media representation of autism?
I am definitely a Netflix binger. Yeah, I think it's another space where there's definitely improvement happening. And I think that's not limited to autism. It's, we can see it in representation across a lot of different marginalised communities, which is great. That there's more sort of authentic and real representation happening. I think we've had for quite a while. We've had some of the tropes like Sheldon Cooper, and of course, Rain Man, always white, always male, always sort of from the same cultural backgrounds, and usually, sort of good at maths or science or computers, or it's that autism stereotype that everyone is familiar with. So I've actually been really, really excited to see some of the content that's coming out in the last few years that has had the genuine autistic involvement in the making of the content. So I loved Everything's Going to Be Okay, which was Josh Thomas's TV series with Kayla Cromer, I want to say, is the name of the autistic actress who plays the autistic character in that series. I loved that one. It was just so great to see such an authentic representation of autism in a TV show. Even though her experience was different to my experience, there were just the little subtle things that I picked up on as an autistic person that a non-autistic person probably wouldn't even notice. And I think that's the sort of quality that you get when representation is done right and done with the involvement of people from the community.
That's about the third or the fourth recommendation I've heard for that show in the last maybe 2 weeks, which I think really says to me that I need to watch it. I did watch Josh Thomas's other show, Please Like Me, which I really loved. So, all positives I'm hearing. I definitely need to watch this show.
I mean, it's a very different storyline and focus, but yeah, I really loved it. It was a great show. I loved Please Like Me as well. Love a bit of Hannah Gadsby.
Yes.
Yeah.
Autistic and queer, you can't not love Hannah Gadsby. So definitely recommend that one. I actually watched also The New Heartbreak High not long ago.
It's so good.
It was really good. I really, loved, again, seeing that autistic representation, and I think it was done in a way where it was sort of, there was a little bit of an educational element built in as well, but not done in kind of an in-your-face, like after-school special, we're going to sit down and teach you about autism way. I think it was a good balance of sort of teaching people without being preachy, and again, played by an autistic actress. I think autism is really difficult to play well if you're not autistic. So it's great to see, the genuine portrayals by autistic people, but also autistic people actually getting these opportunities to have, exposure in mainstream media as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I watched The Good Doctor, so I know what you mean about how cringy it can be when someone's trying to portray autism in that very stereotypical way as well.
I haven't actually been able to bring myself to watch more than just the ads.
Yeah.
The Good Doctor.
I don't recommend it. Yeah.
It's painful to me.
Yeah. It's not great, the whole thing. Yeah. But what those recommendations tell me is that I've got a bit of catching up to do with my Netflix shows. You are part of the All About Women Festival as a panelist on the Actually Autistic panel. Can you tell us what you look forward to the most about the panel or the festival in general?
Yes, I am super excited to be part of the festival, part of this panel. I will be on the panel with, I'm so excited, I'll be on the panel with Grace Tame and Chloe Hayden.
It's a good panel.
Yes, I'm really looking forward to it, particularly having only just watched Heartbreak High not that long ago, to get to sit down and have a chat to Courtney herself. And of course, Grace Tame, who is just such a powerful, powerful woman. So I'm really looking forward to meeting them. And of course, also the panel will be moderated by Amy Tunig, who is actually a colleague of mine and another just really fierce, strong First Nations woman. So I'm actually really looking forward to just sitting down and having a chat with the panelists. I think is going to be a really interesting discussion. But aside from that, because of course I'm looking forward to my own panel, there's some really great sessions that are going to be happening during the festival. There's a few other panels that I'm also really, really interested to hopefully have a chance to go along and listen to. There's a panel called, I think, Who is Feminism For? That's going to be discussing sort of some of the nuance around inclusion of different minority identities within feminism, which is one that I'm really interested personally because I don't identify as a woman. I'm non-binary. So for me, the idea of being part of an All About Women festival is a little bit odd. I was assured that it's an inclusive festival. But I'm really interested to sort of hear those panelists' take on the idea of feminism as an intersectional sort of movement. There's a panel on justice, which I'm also really interested in with my sort of criminal justice background, that will be sort of looking at the ways that violence against women and I think with a focus on sexual violence is sort of dealt with in the justice system and I guess some of the barriers and failings of the system for, victims and survivors. So that I think will be probably a really difficult panel, but also a really interesting discussion. Yeah, there's, I saw there's a panel on body positivity, but specifically the bodies that have been left behind by the movement, which I really hope they touch on, disabled bodies as a disability advocate. So just heaps of really interesting panels that I feel like I can sort of really relate to personally and as an activist and an advocate. And I think there's probably going to be something for everyone. There's, clay workshops and craft workshops and things as well. So, I think it'll be a really great festival.
Amazing. We are sadly in Victoria and cannot make it to Sydney, but I know I'm going to be tuning in on some of the live streams, which I'm really excited to do as well.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you know what, Jac? I think that was our last question for today. So we might actually wrap things up there. Thank you so much for such an interesting discussion. I definitely learned something and I'm sure our listeners have as well. Thank you so much for joining us.
No worries. Thank you.
And that wraps up our interview. Now, we will quickly mention what is going on the blog post on our website to link in with this episode.
So briefly, just some of the resources that we will link to include Jac's social media and their website, which for those listening is www.jacademic.com, which is a great URL, by the way. We'll also post links to where you can find out more about some of Jac's research, their TED Talk as well, and some of the TV shows that Jac recommended. I am very biased towards Heartbreak High, of course, so I'm just going to throw in my own extra recommendation there.
Awesome. And that wraps us up for today. Thanks so much for listening. If you like us, please leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
And don't forget to find us on novelfeelings.com or on Instagram, Twitter, The Storygraph, and Goodreads, all via @novel_feelings.
You can technically find me on Bookstagram at paved with books with an extra S. I currently don't have a bookshelf, so there's like no space to take pretty photos because my floor is covered with books. So,
but you are eventually going to get a really epic new bookshelf, of course.
Eventually, yes.
Yes.
An IKEA trip is in the calendar.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much to everybody who listened and tuned in. And a big thank you once again to Jac for this awesome interview. Bye, everybody.
See ya.